When France collapsed in the summer of 1940, it was not merely a military defeat, but a psychological rupture. The Third Republic dissolved under the pressure of Blitzkrieg, and in the vacuum, choices multiplied. For some Frenchmen, the armistice was not an end, but a beginning, a moment where old loyalties dissolved and new, darker ones formed. The Vichy regime offered collaboration as pragmatism, survival as virtue, obedience as order. But beyond administration and policing, beyond paperwork and denunciations, there emerged something more radical. French men who would volunteer to fight alongside the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS on the Eastern Front, not as coerced auxiliaries, but as ideological participants in a war of annihilation. The most infamous of these formations, the Legion of French Volunteers Against Bolshevism, was born in 1941 after Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa. Officially, it was framed as a crusade against communism, a continuation of fears that had haunted Europe since the Russian Revolution. Privately, German intelligence saw it as something else, a propaganda instrument and a test. If Frenchmen could be induced to fight for the Reich, then the narrative of Nazi Europe as a voluntary union gained credibility. Recruitment offices opened in Paris, Lyon, and provincial cities, adorned with posters depicting heroic figures marching east to save civilization from the red tide. The reality, however, was colder, filthier, and infinitely more brutal. Uncensored footage recovered after the war shows these men arriving on the Eastern Front ill-equipped, poorly trained, and immediately thrown into one of the most savage theaters of human conflict. They were absorbed into German command structures, their Frenchness tolerated but never respected. Orders were given in German, punishments swift and merciless. Many quickly discovered that this was not a conventional war, but a campaign of extermination. Villages suspected of partisan activity were burned, civilians executed, prisoners shot rather than taken. French soldiers, once raised on Republican ideals or Catholic tradition, found themselves complicit in actions that shattered any illusion of honorable combat. The psychological descent was accelerated by the environment itself. The Eastern Front devoured identities. Hunger gnawed constantly, frostbitten limbs piled up in field hospitals, and lice-infested trenches erased any romantic notions of crusade. Letters home, when they survived censorship, often spoke in coded language, hinting at horrors without naming them. Some wrote of shame, others of numbness, and a few, disturbingly, of exhilaration. German officers noted in intelligence reports that certain French volunteers adapted quickly to anti-partisan warfare, displaying a ferocity that surprised even seasoned SS commanders. Violence, once normalized, became currency. Behind the lines, intelligence battles unfolded in silence. The Abwehr and later the SD monitored French units closely, aware that loyalty born of ideology could also fracture under disillusionment. Informants were embedded, listening for dissent, watching for hesitation. At the same time, Allied intelligence agencies tracked these units obsessively. British and Free French analysts compiled lists of names, tracing family connections, financial histories, political affiliations. Each volunteer represented not just a military asset to Germany, but a psychological wound to France occupied, a symbol the resistance worked desperately to erase. Yet the story grows darker still when one examines the role some French collaborators played in specialized operations. Certain individuals were selected for anti-partisan units that blurred the line between soldier and executioner. These groups operated in Belarus, Ukraine, and later in the Baltic regions, where the war against resistance movements became a laboratory of terror. Interrogations were conducted with methods learned from the Gestapo. Entire regions were pacified through collective punishment. The footage, when it survives, shows faces hardened beyond recognition, men moving through smoke and snow with mechanical precision, as if empathy itself had frozen solid. By 1943, as German losses mounted, the Legion was reorganized and eventually absorbed into the Waffen-SS, forming what became known as the Charlemagne Division. This transformation was not merely administrative, it was symbolic. The black uniform carried with it a deeper ideological commitment and an unspoken contract of absolute loyalty. For the Frenchmen who accepted it, return was no longer possible. Desertion meant execution, Survival meant deeper complicity. German psychological warfare units produced films and photographs showcasing these French SS men, broadcasting them across occupied Europe as proof that national identities could be rewritten under the Reich. Meanwhile, the resistance inside France intensified its campaign against collaborators. Assassinations, sabotage, and information leaks targeted not only German officers but French auxiliaries whose knowledge of local terrain made them especially dangerous. Families of volunteers became targets, sometimes punished by resistance cells, sometimes by German authorities suspicious of wavering loyalty. The war fractured communities into silent battlefields where trust evaporated. Every knock on the door carried the weight of possible betrayal.
As the Allies landed in Normandy and pushed eastward, the psychological trap closed. French SS units were redeployed in desperation, thrown into collapsing fronts with little strategic value. Some fought fanatically, believing the war was already lost and that only annihilation awaited them. Others attempted escape, blending into civilian populations, burning documents, changing names. Intelligence archives reveal frantic last-minute communications between German commanders and Vichy officials, discussing evacuation routes, cover stories, and the destruction of records that could implicate high-ranking collaborators. The final act unfolded in the ruins of Berlin. Elements of the Charlemagne division were among the last foreign units defending Hitler's bunker during the Battle of Berlin. In the surreal final days of the Reich, French voices echoed through shattered streets, firing Panzerfausts at Soviet tanks beneath collapsing buildings. This moment, often sensationalized, carries a deeper psychological weight. These men, who once marched under French flags, now died in the capital of a regime that would erase them from history the moment it fell. Their presence there was less about victory than about the impossibility of return. After the war, silence descended. Trials were selective, memories edited. Some collaborators were executed, others imprisoned, many quietly reintegrated into post-war society. Files vanished, testimonies softened. The narrative of universal resistance proved too powerful, too necessary for national healing. Yet in intelligence vaults and forgotten reels of film, the evidence remained. The uncensored footage, when viewed without the comfort of distance, confronts us with a question that has no easy answer: how ordinary men become instruments of cruelty when ideology, fear, and opportunity converge. This hidden dimension of World War II is not merely about betrayal or extremism, it is about the fragility of moral boundaries under pressure. The French soldiers who fought in Hitler's war did not emerge from a vacuum. They were shaped by economic collapse, political polarization, propaganda, and the intoxicating promise of belonging in a world that had already fallen apart. Their story does not absolve them, but it complicates the simplistic division between victim and villain. As the footage fades, what remains is not judgment, but unease. The war behind the war, the silent negotiations between conscience and survival, the ease with which lines are crossed when the world fractures. This is the cruelty of the crusade, not because it was uniquely monstrous, but because it reveals how easily any society can produce willing participants in its own moral undoing. In that revelation lies the true unsettling legacy of French soldiers in Hitler's war, a legacy that continues to whisper from the shadows of history, demanding not comfort but reckoning.